happening in Ukraine currently. This is how Kiev looks like. And this is not just in Kiev. Many cities across Ukraine is currently in darkness. So yesterday, Russia launched another wave of missiles and drone attacks on Ukraine. This is not new. We've seen this wave of Russian attacks on Ukraine ever since the war began. But what caught my attention this time around is the inability of the Ukrainian armed forces to shoot down these drones and missiles. Basically, Russian drones were roaming freely in Kiev and they couldn't do anything about it. This indicates that Ukraine currently, they don't have air defense systems to protect their airspace. So guys, this is the damage caused by Russian drones and missiles during the night. So Russia targeted the electrical infrastructure, the main generation stations. Note, we are in winter and the Ukrainians need the electricity, not just to charge their phones or watch TV. No, they also need it for heat. Heat is very, very crucial, especially in countries with snow, right? You see, I don't know who advised the Ukrainians to start this, but I quite remember I told you guys that Ukraine attacking Russian gas pipelines was a terrible mistake, and they were going to pay a very huge price for that. And here we are. Anybody who is familiar with how the Russians operate, you realize that they always retaliate. They don't rush. They take their time. Most times people always want to see the Russians retaliating immediately, but they don't. And when you are fighting against an opponent that is very patient, that is very, very calculative, they don't act based on emotions, then it's very, very dangerous. This is clearly a psychological warfare that Putin is waging against the Ukrainians. The point is, how long can the Ukrainians endure this level of hardship? Already, a lot of people in Ukraine are currently fed up with the war. They want an end to it. They just don't want this war to continue again because they are struggling a lot. Look at the level of damage. Absolutely insane. How many of you remember this? In the beginning of the winter, I did a story about Ukraine electrical infrastructure. Now, the West and Uncle Sam is not happy about it. They continue to condemn Russia, and Russia continue to refer them to Yugoslavia. Right? Yeltsin begged Clinton not to bomb Yugoslavia, not to attack the electrical infrastructure, but they went ahead and did all this. I've spoken about it before, that when it comes to weaponizing electricity in times of war, this was something that Uncle Sam and their NATO allies started. It started in Yugoslavia. The Russians did one day. They went ahead and did the same thing in Iraq. Even in Libya, they went to the extent of cutting even water for people to drink. So Russia is not the first country to weaponize electricity in times of war. Now, even Western bloggers and journalists who support Ukraine, all of them are not coming out to say the truth.
It's Ukraine's coldest winter yet since the start of the full-scale invasion. And there have been really terrible power cuts and blackouts as a result of continued Russian strikes, which have only increased over the last several weeks. In order for the population to be able to cope a little better, they've created a network of so-called invincibility points. It's these tents that there are over 1,000 of around the city where people can come out of the cold to warm up. There are a lot of reasons why the city, the capital, isn't able to keep up with the power situation. And it's not just because of the Russian attacks. Ooh, it's nice and cozy in here. This is one of the invincibility points. There's over 1,000 of them around the city. And they keep people warm in neighborhoods where there's no power. But that's not all they do here. There's food. There's internet via Elon Musk's Starlink. And there are tables where people can do all kinds of things like do their homework or just charge their phones. The main reason the power is going in and out is because of the Russian attacks, the missile strikes, the drone strikes that are hitting power stations and substations, and They're just not able to repair them fast enough to keep the electricity on. But that's not the only thing at play here. One of the first things the Trump administration did once in power was to dismantle U.S. aid, America's Foreign Assistance Fund. This had an impact around the world, but especially in Ukraine, where U.S. aid had an effective $980 million program to restore damaged energy infrastructure. On top of that, Ukraine was rocked by a $100 million corruption scandal last year. Business partners of President Volodymyr Zelensky were accused of siphoning the money from the state-owned nuclear power company, money that could have been plowed into fixing the grid. That is, of course, little consolation to the millions of people trying to survive Ukraine's worst winter of war yet. The corruption scandal in the energy sector obviously isn't a good look for Ukraine or for the Zelensky administration. But there's another way of looking at it. In a country like Russia, top officials don't lose their jobs because of corruption. They only lose their jobs because of disloyalty to Vladimir Putin. And the fact that the chief of staff of the Zelensky administration was forced out and a number of other top officials had to quit or even fled the country, it actually gives me a little hope that in Ukraine...
Look, it doesn't matter who you support in this war. The point is, there are innocent Ukrainians who are currently paying the consequences for the mistakes of some politicians who will never be on the front line, who are not suffering in the front line, who have mansions in abroad. They are paying the price for that. What is the point in this war? Sooner or later, it doesn't matter. Sooner or later, this war is going to end. But the point is, Ukraine is going to lose territories. They are going to lose their resources, both human and mineral resources. A whole generation or generations in Ukraine are paying a terrible price for, this whole Western agenda to inflict strategic defeat on Russia. The point is, this so-called strategic defeat is not working.
The question that does need to be answered, though, is what is the West's play here? If it's, like many have suggested, well, they started all this because if the war continues on, then that means Russia keeps getting hurt. Okay, I mean, I think that was a terrible thing to do because in order to hurt Russia, you are getting, an entire generation of men wiped out in Ukraine and their territory destroyed and a lot of it lost permanently to the Russian side.
Something interesting is also happening. They have started some agenda against Russia. When you look at the Epstein files, when you look across Europe, almost all the big countries in Europe, their leaders, one way or the other, are involved in this whole Epstein scandal, whatever. It is only Vladimir Putin who is not part. They are trying to drag Putin and Russia name into this whole Epstein case at all costs. They are trying to put all the blame on Russia. This is something I saw yesterday on Sky News, on TikTok. They decided to turn off their comment section on TikTok. They claim that they have an audio of Epstein trying to, coach somebody how to get closer to Putin, and just today, the British MI6 boss came out claiming that this Epstein guy was recruited by the Russians. So you see, they've started an agenda to push all the blame on Russia.
The whole Epstein files, as they're coming out, are showing the extensive connections between Epstein and Russia. And I would argue this goes right back to the 1970s. My sources in America tell me that the American government, the American intelligence services assessment was that Epstein was recruited as early as the 1970s by Russian organized crime figures in New York. And his information was being used, his operational techniques were being used from that point onwards. So this scandal, this case, if you like, goes back decades. I think Epstein was in business with Robert Maxwell in the late 1980s. And what they were doing at the time, ostensibly, was Maxwell was getting Jewish people, Soviet Jews, out of Russia into Israel. My sources tell me, both in America and independently, that the other side of that, the quid pro quo thread, was that they were laundering Soviet Communist Party hard currency into the West, and that Epstein was clearly recruited as part of that operation.